Maria Rodriguez never imagined that her Tuesday morning routine would change her life forever. At 28 years old, she worked as a firearms technician at Precision Arms, a small gun shop nestled in the heart of downtown Phoenix. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed her to use the mechanical skills she'd learned from her father, who had been a mechanic his entire life. Every morning, Maria arrived at the shop at 7:30, a full hour before opening time. She liked the quiet moments before customers arrived, when she could focus completely on her work. The smell of gun oil and metal polish had become as familiar to her as morning coffee. Her workstation was immaculate, with tools arranged precisely where she could reach them without looking. That Tuesday started like any other. Maria unlocked the shop's heavy front door, disabled the alarm system, and flicked on the fluorescent lights that illuminated rows of firearms displayed behind glass cases. She made her way to the back workshop, where several weapons waited for her attention. A hunting rifle needed its scope adjusted, 2 handguns required cleaning after customers had test-fired them, and an antique revolver needed a complete overhaul. Maria had always been good with her hands. As a child, she'd helped her father fix cars in their garage, learning to understand how different parts worked together. When she graduated high school, most of her friends went to college, but Maria chose a different path. She enrolled in a gunsmith program at the local technical college, drawn by the precision and craftsmanship the work required. Her colleagues at Precision Arms respected her skill. Tom Williams, the shop owner, often said Maria had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen. She could adjust a trigger mechanism with the delicacy of a surgeon, making minute changes that most people couldn't even detect. Customers frequently requested her specifically, knowing their weapons would be returned in perfect condition. The morning progressed normally as Maria worked on the hunting rifle. She carefully adjusted the scope mounting, ensuring the alignment was perfect. Through the workshop window, she could see early commuters walking past on their way to offices and cafes. Phoenix was waking up, and soon the shop would fill with its usual mix of hunters, sport shooters, and collectors. Around 9:15, the front door chimed as the first customer of the day entered. Maria could hear Tom greeting someone, but she remained focused on her work. The antique revolver demanded her full attention. Its previous owner had clearly neglected it, and several internal components showed signs of corrosion. She disassembled it completely, laying each part on a clean cloth in the exact order she'd removed them. As she worked, Maria thought about her plans for the weekend. Her younger brother Carlos was visiting from college, and they'd planned to go hiking in the desert outside the city. Carlos always teased her about working with guns, saying she should have become a teacher or nurse like their mother wanted. But Maria loved her work. There was something deeply satisfying about taking a broken mechanism and making it function perfectly again. The morning customer left, and Tom walked back to check on Maria's progress. He was a kind man in his 60s who'd been in the firearms business for over 30 years. Tom had hired Maria 3 years ago, impressed by her technical knowledge and professional attitude. He'd become something of a father figure to her, especially since her own father had passed away 2 years earlier. "How's that old Colt coming along?" Tom asked, peering over her shoulder at the disassembled revolver. "It's in worse shape than I thought," Maria replied, holding up a corroded spring. "But it's savable. The previous owner probably stored it somewhere damp. I'll need to replace several small parts, but the frame and barrel are solid." Tom nodded approvingly. "Take your time with it. Mrs. Henderson said it belonged to her grandfather, so it has sentimental value. She's not in any hurry." As Tom returned to the front of the shop, Maria continued her methodical work. She cleaned each component thoroughly, removing decades of accumulated grime and corrosion. The process required patience, but she found it meditative. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion precise and purposeful. Around 10:30, she heard the door chime again, followed by voices from the front of the shop. One voice belonged to Tom, but she didn't recognize the other. It sounded like a young man, speaking quickly and with an edge of nervousness. Maria paid little attention, accustomed to the constant flow of customers throughout the day. She was examining the revolver's cylinder when she heard Tom's voice change. Something in his tone made her look up from her work. The conversation in the front room had become quieter, more intense. Maria set down her tools and moved closer to the doorway that separated the workshop from the main shop floor. "I need you to open the register," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "And I need you to do it now." Maria's heart began to beat faster. She could see Tom's back through the partially open doorway. His hands were raised slightly, and his posture was rigid with tension. A robbery was happening just 20 feet away from where she stood. Moving carefully to avoid making any noise, Maria positioned herself where she could see more of the front room. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood near the counter. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, and his right hand was hidden inside his jacket. His movements were jerky and unpredictable, suggesting he was either nervous or under the influence of something. "Listen, son," Tom was saying in his calm, steady voice. "There's only about $50 in that register. It's not worth—" "Shut up," the young man snapped. "Just open it." Maria's mind raced. The shop's landline was in the front room, too close to the robber to reach safely. Her cell phone was in her purse, which she'd left in the small break room at the back of the shop. The rear exit was only 10 feet behind her, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Tom alone with an armed criminal. She looked at her workstation, where the partially assembled revolver lay in pieces. Even if she could put it together quickly, she had no ammunition readily available. The shop's inventory of loaded firearms was kept in locked cases in the front room, useless in the current situation. The young man was becoming more agitated. "Hurry up. I know you've got more money somewhere. This is a gun shop. The register is all I have access to," Tom replied, his hands moving slowly toward the cash drawer. "The safe is on a timer. I can't open it until—" "You're lying." The robber's voice cracked with stress. Maria realized the situation was escalating dangerously. Tom was trying to de-escalate, but the young man was clearly desperate and possibly high. She needed to do something. But what? She had no weapons, no way to call for help, and no training for this kind of situation. Then she remembered the antique revolver. While it was disassembled, she had been checking each component carefully. The gun was functional. It just needed to be put back together. More importantly, she remembered seeing a small box of ammunition for it among Mrs. Henderson's belongings. The elderly woman had brought the bullets with the gun, saying they were probably too old to use, but she wanted to include everything her grandfather had left her. Moving as quietly as possible, Maria located the ammunition box. The cartridges were old but appeared to be in good condition. Her hands shaking slightly, she began the process of reassembling the revolver. Years of practice allowed her to work quickly despite her nervousness. Each component clicked into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. From the front room, she could hear the robber becoming increasingly agitated. Tom was doing his best to comply with the demands while trying to keep the situation calm. But it was clear that the young man was losing control. "This is taking too long," the robber shouted. "What are you trying to pull?" Maria finished assembling the revolver and carefully loaded one cartridge into the cylinder. Her father had always taught her to treat every firearm as if it were loaded, and the weight of that responsibility felt enormous now. She had never pointed a gun at another human being, and hoped she would never have to fire it. Taking a deep breath, Maria moved toward the doorway. Through the gap, she could see that the robber had pulled a small pistol from his jacket and was pointing it directly at Tom. The older man's face was pale, but he maintained his composure. "Please," Tom was saying. "Just take the money and go. Nobody needs to get hurt." The young man's hand was shaking as he held the gun. "Where's the good stuff? I know you've got expensive guns here." It was at that moment that Maria stepped into the doorway. The restored revolver held firmly in both hands, pointed at the floor. "Stop right there," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The robber spun toward her, his own weapon wavering between her and Tom. For a split second, nobody moved. Then everything happened very quickly. The young man's finger tightened on his trigger as he swung his pistol toward Maria. Tom dove to the side, knocking over a display case. And Maria, acting on instinct and years of firearms training, raised the antique revolver and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the small shop like thunder. The gunshot rang out like a crack of lightning in the small shop. for a moment that seemed to last forever. Nobody moved. Then the young robber stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor as he clutched his shoulder. Maria stood frozen in the doorway, the smoking revolver still gripped tightly in her hands. "Call 911, she shouted to Tom, who was picking himself up from behind the overturned display case. The older man's hands were shaking as he reached for the phone, but he managed to dial the emergency number with surprising speed. The wounded robber had collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed them against his shoulder wound. His face was pale and shocked, the bravado and aggression completely drained out of him. "I need an ambulance at Precision Arms on Central Avenue," Tom was saying into the phone. "We have a gunshot wound and an attempted robbery." Maria slowly lowered the revolver, her hand still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had aimed for the robber's shoulder, hoping to disable him without causing permanent damage. The shot had been instinctive, fired in the split second when she saw his finger tightening on the trigger of his own weapon. "Are you okay?" she called to the wounded man, taking a careful step toward him while keeping the revolver pointed away from everyone. The robber looked up at her with pain-filled eyes. "I think so," he mumbled. "It hurts really bad." And, despite what had just happened, Maria felt a wave of sympathy for the young man. Up close, he looked even younger than she had first thought, probably barely out of his teens. His clothes were dirty and worn, and she could see track marks on his exposed arm. This wasn't a hardened criminal but a desperate kid, probably trying to get money for drugs. "The police and paramedics are on their way," Tom announced, hanging up the phone. He walked over to where Maria stood, his face still pale but his voice steady. "You saved both our lives." That kid was about to shoot. Maria carefully set the revolver down on the counter, her hands finally beginning to steady. "I couldn't let him hurt you," she said quietly. "I just reacted." The sound of sirens grew louder as emergency vehicles approached. Within minutes, the shop was filled with police officers, paramedics, and emergency medical technicians. Maria found herself being questioned by Detective Sarah Chen, a patient woman in her 40s who specialized in violent crimes. "Walk me through exactly what happened," Detective Chen said, pen poised over her notepad. Maria recounted the morning's events in detail, from her normal routine to the moment she fired the shot. She explained how she had assembled the antique revolver and her split-second decision to intervene when she saw the robber pointing his gun at Tom. "You used a gun that was being repaired?" the detective asked. "It was an antique that I was restoring," Maria explained. "It was fully functional, just dirty and corroded from years of neglect. I had just finished cleaning and reassembling it when the robbery started." Meanwhile, paramedics were treating the wounded robber, whose name was revealed to be Kevin Martinez, 19 years old with a record of petty theft and drug possession. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting any major arteries or bones. He would need surgery to clean the wound, but he was expected to make a full recovery. As the paramedics loaded Kevin onto a stretcher, he looked over at Maria. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "I didn't want to hurt anybody. I just needed money for, you know." Maria nodded, feeling the complex mix of emotions that would stay with her for days to come. Relief that nobody had been killed, sympathy for a young man whose life had gone so wrong, and a deep sadness that the situation had escalated to violence. "He's going to be okay," one of the paramedics told her as they prepared to transport Kevin to the hospital. "You did good work. A couple inches to either side and things could have been much worse." After the ambulance left, Detective Chen continued her investigation. She examined the crime scene, took photographs, and collected evidence. Tom provided security camera footage that clearly showed the robbery attempt and Maria's intervention. "This is going to be pretty straightforward," the detective told Maria. "The video shows you acted in defense of yourself and Mr. Williams. The district attorney will review everything, but I don't expect you'll face any charges. You may have to testify if the case goes to trial, though." News of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. By afternoon, reporters from local television stations had arrived at the shop. Maria found herself uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to let Tom speak to the media while she tried to process what had happened. Local gun shop employee stops armed robbery, read the headline on the evening news. The story portrayed Maria as a hero who had used her professional skills to save lives, but she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had been put in an impossible situation and had done what seemed necessary at the time. That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment, staring at her hands. They were steady now, but she could still feel the weight of the old revolver and remember the sound it made when she fired it. Her brother Carlos called from college, having seen the news story online. "Maria, are you okay?" "I saw what happened on the news," he said, his voice full of concern. "I'm fine," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It all happened so fast. I keep thinking about what could have gone wrong." "You did the right thing," Carlos assured her. "That guy could have killed Tom. You saved his life." Over the next few days, Maria tried to return to her normal routine, but the incident had changed something fundamental about her relationship with her work. Every time she handled a firearm, she thought about the power it represented and the responsibility that came with that power. The shop received dozens of phone calls from people praising Maria's actions. Several customers stopped by specifically to thank her for protecting Tom and preventing what could have been a tragedy. But Maria also received some criticism from people who felt she should have found a non-violent solution or called police instead of taking matters into her own hands. "You can't please everyone," Tom told her during one of their conversations about the incident. "You made a split-second decision under incredible pressure. Monday morning quarterbacks always think they know better, but they weren't here." A week after the shooting, Maria received a phone call from Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who owned the antique revolver. "I saw the news about what happened," Mrs. Henderson said. "I want you to know that I think my grandfather would have been proud. He always said that gun was meant to protect good people from bad ones." The call meant more to Maria than all the news coverage combined. Knowing that the weapon's owner approved of how it had been used helped ease some of the guilt she felt about the violence. Detective Chen called with updates on Kevin Martinez's case. The young man was cooperating with authorities and had agreed to plead guilty to armed robbery in exchange for a reduced sentence that included mandatory drug treatment. He was facing several years in prison. But the prosecutor was recommending rehabilitation programs rather than purely punitive measures. "He asked me to give you a message," Detective Chen told Maria. "He wanted you to know that getting shot probably saved his life. He said he was heading down a path that would have ended much worse if someone hadn't stopped him." The irony wasn't lost on Maria. In trying to protect Tom from violence, she had potentially saved the robber's life as well. Kevin's arrest had forced him to confront his drug addiction and the criminal behavior it had driven him to. The wound would heal, but perhaps the experience would help him make better choices in the future. As the weeks passed, Maria began to feel more comfortable with what had happened. She started sleeping better and found that her hands were as steady as ever when she worked on firearms. The incident had tested her in ways she never could have imagined, but it had also revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed. Tom decided to install additional security measures in the shop, including panic buttons and improved surveillance cameras. He also enrolled both himself and Maria in advanced firearms training courses, wanting to be better prepared if such a situation ever arose again. "I've been in this business for 30 years, Tom told her, "and I always thought I knew how I'd react in a situation like that. But when it actually happened, I froze. You kept your head and did what needed to be done." Maria appreciated Tom's support, but she hoped she would never have to use those skills again. The weight of pointing a weapon at another human being, even in self-defense, was something she carried with her every day. 3 months after the shooting, Maria's life had settled into a new normal, though the incident continued to influence her daily routine. The shop had become busier than ever, with many new customers coming in specifically because they had heard about Maria's quick thinking during the robbery. Some wanted to meet the woman they'd seen on the news, while others expressed interest in learning about firearms safety and self-defense. Tom had suggested that Maria consider teaching firearms safety courses, given her technical expertise and the real-world experience she'd gained. At first, she was hesitant about the idea. The thought of being in front of groups of people, teaching them to handle weapons, felt like a huge responsibility. But as more customers asked her questions about gun safety and proper handling techniques, she began to see the value in formal education. People need to understand that owning a firearm isn't just about having it, Maria explained to her first safety class. A group of 8 adults ranging from college students to retirees. It's about knowing how to maintain it, store it safely, and most importantly, understanding the enormous responsibility that comes with it. The classes were small and focused, held in the back room of the shop on Saturday mornings. Maria covered everything from basic mechanics and cleaning to legal responsibilities and conflict de-escalation. She always emphasized that using a weapon should be an absolute last resort, something she understood more deeply after her own experience. During one class, a middle-aged woman named Janet raised her hand. "How did you know you were making the right decision when you shot that robber? Weren't you afraid of making a mistake?" Maria paused, remembering the weight of that moment. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I could see that Tom was in immediate danger, and I had to act. The important thing is that I had proper training, and I aimed to disable, not to kill. Every situation is different, and you have to be prepared for the legal and emotional consequences of your actions." These conversations helped Maria process her own experience while helping others prepare for situations they hoped they'd never face. She found that teaching required her to think more deeply about the ethical and practical aspects of firearms ownership, making her more thoughtful about her own relationship with weapons. The legal aftermath of the shooting had proceeded smoothly. As Detective Chen had predicted, the district attorney cleared Maria of any wrongdoing, ruling that she had acted in lawful self-defense and defense of others. Kevin Martinez had been sentenced to 3 years in prison with eligibility for early release if he successfully completed drug treatment programs. He was currently in a rehabilitation facility, according to the last update Maria had received. One unexpected development was a letter Maria received from Kevin's mother, Elena Martinez. The woman had tracked down Maria's address through court records and written to thank her for potentially saving both her son's life and Tom's. "I know my Kevin did a terrible thing," the letter read in careful handwriting, "but the counselors at the treatment center say that hitting rock bottom like this was probably the only thing that could have made him face his problems. They say he's doing well and really wants to get clean. I wanted to thank you for not killing him when you could have." The letter moved Maria to tears. She had thought often about Kevin in the months since the shooting, wondering if he was getting the help he needed and hoping that the incident would mark a turning point in his life rather than just another tragedy. Elena's letter suggested that perhaps some good was coming from what had been a terrifying and violent situation. Maria decided to write back to Elena, expressing her hope for Kevin's recovery and offering to meet if Elena thought it would be helpful. The two women eventually had coffee together, sharing their perspectives on what had happened and their hopes for the future. Elena was a hard-working woman who cleaned office buildings at night to support her family. She had been struggling with Kevin's addiction for years, feeling helpless as she watched her son destroy his life. "The doctors say addiction is a disease," Elena told Maria, "but it's hard not to feel like I failed him somehow. Maybe if I'd been stricter or gotten him help sooner." "You can't blame yourself," Maria replied. "You did what you thought was best with the information you had. The important thing now is that he's getting treatment." Their friendship was unusual, given the circumstances that had brought them together. But both women found comfort in talking to someone who understood the complexity of the situation. Maria learned more about the social and economic factors that had contributed to Kevin's problems, while Elena gained insight into the split-second decisions that law-abiding citizens sometimes had to make. As winter approached, Maria received a letter from Kevin himself. He had been in treatment for 6 months and wanted to apologize personally for what he had put her and Tom through. "I know saying sorry doesn't change what I did," Kevin wrote, "but I want you to know that I think about that day every day. Not just because I got shot, but because I realize how close I came to destroying multiple lives, including my own. The counselors here have helped me understand that I was using drugs to deal with problems I didn't know how to face. I'm learning better ways to handle stress and depression." Kevin went on to describe the treatment program, which included job training and education along with addiction counseling. He was learning auto mechanics, inspired partly by Maria's own background in mechanical work, The program would help him find employment when he was released, giving him alternatives to the criminal activity that had supported his drug habit. "I want you to know that I never intended to hurt anyone," the letter continued. "I was desperate and scared. But that's no excuse. I'm grateful that you're a good shot, and that you cared enough about Mr. Williams to risk yourself. I hope someday I can prove to you and everyone else that I'm not the same person who walked into that shop with a gun." Maria was impressed by the maturity and self-awareness Kevin showed in his letter. She wrote back, encouraging his recovery efforts and sharing some of her own thoughts about the incident. Their correspondence continued sporadically over the following months, providing both of them with a way to process the event and move forward constructively. The firearms safety classes had grown popular enough that Maria was now teaching 3 different levels: basic safety for new gun owners, advanced marksmanship for experienced shooters, and a specialized course for people interested in self-defense applications. Tom had given her a raise and additional responsibilities in the shop, recognizing both her technical skills and her growing reputation as an educator. One of her students was Dr. Patricia Collins, a pediatrician who had decided to purchase a firearm for home protection after a series of break-ins in her neighborhood. Dr. Collins was initially nervous about guns, having seen too many gunshot victims in the emergency room, but she appreciated Maria's emphasis on safety and responsibility. "You've changed my perspective," Dr. Collins told Maria after completing the basic safety course. "I always thought of guns as just dangerous tools, but listening to you talk about the responsibility and the decision-making involved, I understand now that the person behind the weapon is what makes the difference." This feedback reinforced Maria's belief that education was crucial for anyone who chose to own firearms. Too many people, she realized, purchased weapons without understanding the legal, ethical, and practical implications of ownership. Her classes attempted to fill that gap, ensuring that students understood not just how to operate their weapons safely, but when and why they might need to use them. A year after the shooting, Maria was invited to speak at a conference for firearms instructors. Her presentation focused on real-world applications of safety training and the psychological aspects of defensive gun use. She spoke honestly about her own experience, including the emotional aftermath of shooting another person, even in clear self-defense. "The moment you fire a weapon at another human being, your life changes forever," she told the audience of instructors. "Even when you're completely justified, even when you save lives, there are consequences that you'll carry with you. Our job as instructors is to make sure people understand those consequences before they find themselves in that situation." Her presentation was well received, leading to invitations to speak at other events and requests for consultation from training programs around the country. Maria was becoming recognized as an expert not just in firearms mechanics, but in the human factors that surrounded defensive gun use. Meanwhile, Kevin Martinez was scheduled for release in 18 months, having made excellent progress in his treatment program. He had earned his GED while incarcerated and completed vocational training in automotive repair. His counselors were optimistic about his prospects for successful reintegration into society. Elena Martinez had become a regular customer at the gun shop, not because she was interested in firearms, but because she enjoyed talking with Maria about their shared experience. She often brought homemade pastries and updates on Kevin's progress. "He wants to meet you when he gets out," Elena told Maria during one of their conversations. "He thinks it would help him with closure, and maybe help him stay on the right path. But he understands if you're not comfortable with that." Maria had mixed feelings about potentially meeting Kevin face to face. Part of her was curious to see how he had changed, while another part of her worried about reopening emotional wounds that had mostly healed. She told Elena she would consider it when the time came, but she wasn't ready to make that decision yet. As Maria reflected on the year that had passed since the shooting, she realized that the incident had transformed her life in ways she never could have anticipated. She had discovered strengths she didn't know she possessed, found a new calling as an educator, and developed unexpected relationships that had enriched her understanding of both human nature and the complex issues surrounding firearms ownership. The antique revolver that had started it all was back in Mrs. Henderson's possession, fully restored and in perfect working order. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on paying Maria's full fee for the restoration work, despite Tom's suggestion that the circumstances warranted a discount. "That gun saved lives," Mrs. Henderson had said firmly. "It deserves to be properly compensated for its service." Maria kept a photograph of the completed revolver on her workstation, not as a trophy or memento of violence, but as a reminder of the responsibility that came with her skills and knowledge. Every weapon she worked on might someday be used to protect innocent people, or it might be misused to cause harm. Her job was to ensure that the mechanical aspects were perfect. But her broader mission had become helping owners understand the weight of that responsibility. The gun shop continued to thrive, with Maria's reputation drawing customers from across the region. Tom had begun talking about eventual retirement, suggesting that Maria might consider becoming a partner in the business. The prospect excited and intimidated her in equal measure. But she was beginning to see a future where she could combine her technical skills, teaching ability, and hard-won wisdom into a career that truly made a difference in her community. The scared young woman who had grabbed an antique revolver in a moment of crisis had evolved into a confident professional who understood that heroism wasn't about seeking danger, but about being prepared to act responsibly when danger found you. And every day, through her work and her teaching, she continued to honor the lesson that a single shot had taught her about courage, responsibility, and the power of making the right choice in the most difficult moments.